The idea for this meeting came from questions or comments about the economy that we often get from the public when doing street conversations. Our audience will be familiar with the idea that Australia can become a clean energy superpower, but our community is sceptical that we can stop burning coal and gas and ditch our fossil fuel exports without trashing the economy and causing significant unemployment. So we're fortunate to have Richard Dennis from the Australia Institute and Heidi Lee from Beyond Zero Emissions here tonight to address these big issues. So, to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Richard Dennis is Executive Director at the Australia Institute, one of Australia's most influential public policy think tanks. He's a prominent Australian economist, author, and public policy commentator. Prior to his appointment at the Australia Institute, Dennis was Senior Strategic Advisor to Australian Greens leader Senator Bob Brown and was also Chief of Staff to Senator Natasha Stott-Despoja, former leader of the Australian Democrats. He publishes regularly in academic journals and has written 6 books. Would you please join me in welcoming Richard to the stage?
Thank you so much, and thanks everyone for coming out on a chilly night. I know most people think there's not enough time in their week to talk about macroeconomics, especially after dinner. Now, I'm firmly of the view that power corrupts and PowerPoint corrupts absolutely. So, believe it or not, despite being a macroeconomist whose PhD is in macroeconomic modelling, I'm not going to use a single slide tonight. Because economics isn't actually about numbers. Economics is about how the things we do interact with the other things we do. And so much, I think, of what we hear about climate change and energy transition, so much of it overcomplicates so much of what we need to do. And indeed, we focus on this transition almost to the exclusion of all the other transitions taking place in the Australian economy. So I am going to speak bluntly tonight. I'm going to be flippant about a whole bunch of things, but I cannot stress enough that I mean every word I'm saying tonight. I mean it literally. And if you want to reach out afterwards, I will happily send you all the slides in the world. No, I mean that. Like, what I'm saying is based on lots of research. What I'm saying is based on lots of data. But the story I want to tell you is not a story of one number's bigger than another. That's not what actual macroeconomics is about. So let me just start with a couple of heresies, and I won't have time to expand on all of them, but we've got plenty of time to talk about them with questions. So again, I mean what I'm saying very literally. Tackling climate change is not that hard. It's not that hard. It's not that expensive. It's not unique. And I don't think it's anything like the biggest challenge the Australian economy has ever faced. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying there won't be disruption. I'm not saying there won't be costs. But most of the transitions that you have lived through were bigger and harder and more complicated, and they all happened without slides. Okay, they all happened without inquiries. Does anyone remember in the olden days taking photos? Remember photos? Remember photo development labs? Remember all the people that worked in photo development labs? Stuff them, huh? Because then this evil job-destroying technology came along. The mobile phone and the digital camera. And all of the people working in photo development labs lost all of their money. And they sacked all of their workers. And there's a couple of framing places left. Do you remember the big public conversation we had about how to best help people transition out of the photo development labs? Whoops, picked the wrong industry, didn't they? They didn't work for people with political power. They didn't get used as an excuse for propping up photos for decades. Once upon a time, hundreds of thousands of people in Australia worked in the textile, clothing and footwear industry. And then we had a better idea called, let's get rid of all the tariffs and we'll offshore all of that. And tens, hundreds of thousands of people, particularly women with non-English speaking backgrounds working in regional Australia in what we used to call textile mills, all lost their jobs in the name of making our clothes a bit cheaper. Do you remember all the angst we had about helping them find their new job? Nope. Because they didn't work for anyone with political power. Think about all the jobs that used to exist, that you remember, that are gone. Economies are in a permanent state of turmoil, a permanent state of change. This is not new. Has anyone here got a dog that ends in oodle? There are more people giving dogs haircuts in Australia than work in the gas industry. Do you remember all the plans we had? The skills shortages that we needed to plan for? I don't. This is what economies do all the time. They change. And to be clear, we should be nice to people who are adversely affected by change. We should have been nicer to the people in the photo development labs. We should have been far nicer to the women of non-English speaking backgrounds earning low wages working in textile factories in Western Victoria and Western New South Wales. We should have, and we weren't. Yet apparently we're not allowed to stop causing global climate change until we can figure out where Barry the coal miner will work in 12 years' time. And I have sympathy for Barry the coal miner, I do. Sure, he gets paid far more than average, far more than the women that worked in the textile mills, but we should have been nice to them. It doesn't mean we need to be nasty to him. But just to be crystal clear, the economy will change a lot in the next 20 years. Lots of people will lose their job in the next 20 years in far more industries than energy. The question is not, will the economy change? The question is not, will some people lose their jobs? The question is, will we tackle climate change? But we've actually been convinced that we're not allowed to tackle climate change. We're not allowed to just crack on and do simple things, which I'll come to in a minute. We're not allowed to just crack on and do that until we have a crystal ball that can tell us what the future will look like. We're told that we can't just get on and start doing the things we need more of and stop doing the things we need less of until we've got it modelled and scenarioed in decimal places. And sure, I could whip one up. It used to be my job. It's just what we like to call fiction. No, but does anyone think economists can predict the future? Has anyone here got a financial advisor? Does anyone think that anyone can predict the future and tell you which industries will grow and which will shrink with accuracy over 20-year time periods? Oh, well, thanks for stealing my joke. We were getting to Pete. Pete, who didn't think there was enough detail around the voice. But yeah, sure, let's build 8 nuclear reactors with a half-a-page press release. But we needed more detail on how the voice was going to work. See, this is what happens in a rich country. Australia is one of the richest countries in the world. We live at the richest point in world history. We're sitting in one of the richest cities in one of the richest countries. We're sitting in one of the richest suburbs in one of the richest cities in the richest countries in the world. And we've been trained to feel poor. We've been trained to think that it's a bit expensive to avoid catastrophic climate change. Oh, gee, I don't know if we want to rush into saving that. We've just dropped a lazy $300 billion on some submarines. We just spent $200 billion on the stage 3 tax cuts. Apparently the nuclear reactors are going to be free, which I suppose is one thing they got going for them. But see, when we want to crack on and do something, We do it. This is not complicated. And Peter Dutton is right in saying, no, well, I don't know exactly how we'll do it, but I know we need to start. Because he wants to do it. That's the trick. He wants to do it. If Australia, one of the richest countries in the world, that can drop a lazy 300 bill on nuclear submarines, which when Josh Frydenberg was asked, and by the way, that decision didn't even go to Cabinet. Okay? When he was asked, can we afford them? His answer was, if it's a priority, you can always afford it. That's how good it is to live in a rich country. But apparently when it comes to climate change, ooh, gee. Now, big picture, because I don't want to talk for too long, but the transition, the energy transition, unfortunately, it's in the people that make money out of the status quo's interest to convince you that transitioning away from things that make them money is hard. This is not a conversation we had with the photo development labs. This is not a conversation we had with the dogs that didn't need haircuts. This is not a conversation we had with pretty much any other industry where a new technology came along. And to be crystal clear, in Australia today, there's about 50,000 people work in the coal and gas industry. There's about 100,000 work at McDonald's. Okay? I know they're the backbone of the economy, but as a macroeconomist, not a biologist, as a macroeconomist, I can assure you that economies don't have backbones. There's no such thing. Just not a thing. I know all about how we measure and describe economies in Australia, and I never went to the lecture or gave the lecture on backbones, because that happens over in the biology department. If the coal mining or the gas mining industry was the backbone of the Australian industry, it raises questions like, how do the 190 countries that don't have a fossil fuel industry exist? Are they spineless? What's the biggest natural resource that the Japanese mine? Whales. Sorry, maybe I missed one. Yeah, they've got lots of citizens, they've got a lot of people, but they don't have a backbone according to Australian economics. Like most countries in the world don't have the thing that we think we can't live without. This is not economics. By the way, Australia didn't export gas in any significant quantities until 2016. We didn't even used to do it. Now apparently we can't live without it. We published some research, the Australian Institute published some research recently using top secret information that was only available to us and anyone else that could find the Australian Tax Office website, that shows more than half of the gas we export paid no royalties. Not a single cent. Some backbone. Oh, yeah, I know, Richard, but you're misleading people. They pay petroleum resource rent tax instead of royalties. Yeah, no. They don't. The offshore gas industry is yet to pay any royalties except a little bit out of one project in the Northwest Shelf. Not any. And a plucky little startup you might have heard of called Exxon is yet to pay company tax in Australia. But isn't it good that we're giving them a leg up? Like, thank you. What generous people you are in Australia. Give them free gas. Don't make them pay any company tax and help them grow. Because Exxon needs our help. Let's think about macroeconomies. Let's think of a little world's largest fossil fuel exporter, Saudi Arabia. Second largest, Russia. Third largest, us. We're the third largest fossil fuel exporter in the world. Now imagine that you were the treasurer in Saudi Arabia. Indeed, imagine you were a citizen in Saudi Arabia and you heard that the global price of oil had just doubled because of a war in the Ukraine. So you're the largest exporter of oil in the world. The world price of oil's just doubled. You feeling happy or sad? Happy? Yeah. Suckers are going to pay us a fortune for our oil? Yeah, okay, seems controversial. Australia's the world's largest exporter of liquefied natural gas. We're the largest exporter of liquefied natural gas in the world. Price of gas goes up, how do we feel? Poor. Well, now we're going to have to pay more. Our electricity bills go up, gas bills go up, industry pays more for gas. How come the Saudis feel rich when the price of oil goes up, and us, the largest exporter of gas and the second largest exporter of coal, how do we feel poor in the middle of a global surge in world energy prices? Simple answer, 85% foreign owned. It doesn't employ many people, it pays bugger all tax, and the profits go back to the people who own it, the foreign gas industry and the foreign coal industry. Now that's fine, I don't hate foreign investment. But to be clear, what other countries do is tax the hell out of their fossil fuel industry. What we do is subsidise it. Now, I don't know if anyone's heard of a country called Norway. So in Norway, they tax their fossil fuel industry heavily, and they give their kids free university education. In Australia, we subsidise the fossil fuel industry and charge our kids a fortune to go to uni. Indeed, HECS repayments deliver more revenue to the budget than the petroleum resource rent tax. Thanks, kids. You're the backbone of the economy. We have a continent the size of North America, we have a population about the size of Singapore, and we have a GDP about the size of Russia. We're one of the richest countries in the world with one of the smallest populations. Okay, our economy is the 13th or 14th biggest in the world. Our population is quite small. We are rich. We have a continent's worth of resources. We only have to divvy it up between 25 million of us. And somehow, we've found a way to not get rich out of being the world's largest iron ore exporter, the world's largest LNG exporter, the world's second largest coal exporter, soon to be the world's largest exporter of a whole bunch of rare earths. It takes real skill for us to not feel rich in the middle of an energy crisis. The Saudis aren't worried about an energy crisis. They're like, ka-ching! The Norwegians are just watching all that money flood into their sovereign wealth fund, and we're wondering how we're going to pay our electricity bills in a cost of living crisis. That took effort. That took skill. The skill was unfortunately on the lobbyist side, not the public policy formulation side. This is not beyond our wit to fix, just to be crystal clear. This is not complicated stuff. But the sort of scare, well, first we get told that the transition away from fossil fuels will be really, really complicated. Imagine you had a house or a building like this, and imagine it had power points, and imagine that one day the electrons coming in came from wind instead of from a coal-fired power station. What would you have to do that was different? Nothing. It's not a very big transition, is it? But the small number of people that work in coal and gas-fired power stations, yeah, their lives will be disrupted, like the people in the photo development lives were disrupted. But electricity, of all the sources of energy, electricity is the easiest one to transition. It's actually more tedious having to deal with Apple changing their PowerPoints all the time, right? Because our 3-point plugs aren't going anywhere. Where the electrons come from will change, but we're talking here about less than 1% of Australians that are working in that part of the energy system. And as 1% of Australians move from working in one way of making energy to another way of making energy, this will be disruptive for those people. It absolutely will. Just like shutting down the car industry was disruptive. Just like shutting down the textiles industry was disruptive. Just like moving away from, remember ringing and booking hotels? Remember receptionists? Gone. Transition, gone. Right? No transition package. So we do need to transition our macroeconomy. Luckily, to switch from polluting forms of energy to non-polluting forms of energy, the actual transition is not nearly as big as we're told to believe. Now, I can make it sound big. I could put slides up. I could show you how many hundreds of billions. I could say trillions if you wanted. Globally, trillions. Who cares? Does anyone know what GDP in Australia is? Our annual national income, GDP? Someone have a guess? Oop. Oop. 3 trillion. $3,000 billion a year is GDP. 3,000 billion. 3,000. Sorry? Well, but the 300 billion, that's actually over multiple years. But yeah, it's still small. That's how we can afford it. 3,000 billion a year is national income. Only an economist can tell you this. When someone talks about things costing billions of dollars, this is what we call rounding error. No, I mean it. All right? You hear that growth was 3.5% or 3.6%. Right? Billions don't even count in the national accounts. So saying that we'll have to spend hundreds of billions of dollars over coming decades, well, if GDP's 3 trillion a year, over a decade, GDP's going to be, well, way over 30 trillion a year. Right? Hundreds of billions, only an economist can tell you this is rounding error. Now, sure, for the people that work in the industry space, that's a lot of zeros, that's a lot of things to worry about. But again, and in terms of the macroeconomy, we're going to spend far more on cars over that period than we are on the economic transition. We're going to spend more on clothes than we're going to spend on the energy transition. But you don't hear anyone coming out, shock headline, Australians set to spend tens, hundreds of billions of dollars on clothes over the next 20 years. How will we afford it? I don't know, with our enormous income? So I'm not saying this is free, except the nuclear power plants. They're just free. Don't worry about it. It's a scare campaign to make you think it's bigger and harder than it is so that they can slow it down. Because if you already own a coal-fired power station and you can make it run for an extra year or two, that's a really profitable extra year or two. All right? Or if you own the right to build a new coal mine or the right to build a new gas well, if we ban new coal and new gas, then your right is worthless. That's a bit sad. So everyone that's literally invested in the status quo wants the status quo to continue. And the gas industry in Australia, which again, I said coal and gas employ around 50,000 people. The gas industry employs like 20,000 people. Okay, 20,000 people. There's 25 million Australians, 20,000 people work in gas. They're not paying much tax. We just had the future gas strategy from this government, which is talking about gas to 2050 and beyond. Apparently, in order to transition away from fossil fuels, we need more fossil fuels. No, you laugh, but this is actual government policy. This is ridiculous. There's a Senate inquiry going on right now into a gas project in Darwin, the Middle Arm gas project. Labor's first budget, $1.5 billion subsidy for a gas project in Darwin. How can we afford renewables? I don't know, we can certainly afford subsidies for gas. Anyway, the gas executive was asked by Senator David Pocock about, do we really need gas? And the guy actually said, yeah, according to our estimates, if we increase gas, emissions will fall 13%. More gas equals lower emissions. To which was like, well, should we keep increasing gas production and reduce emissions even faster? That's their logic, right? By the way, the gas industry's logic is if we tax them, if we actually made them pay some tax, charge them, and all a royalty is a fee for the product that they take from our ground and sell to their customers. Builders pay for bricks, bakers pay for flour. The gas industry usually doesn't pay for gas. You know what the gas industry's threat is? That if we make them pay royalties, you know what their threat is? they'll stop building new gas projects. Yeah, I know. Is that like the worst threat in history? If you make me pay tax, I'll stop doing the thing you don't want me to do. I'm sold at that price. Right, but here we are in an Australia that believes that somehow, for reasons we can't quite articulate but kind of feel right, we need to reduce emissions, but therefore we should subsidise the expansion of the gas industry because it's the backbone of the economy, even though it doesn't employ many people or pay much tax. And even though it's a fossil fuel that we're trying to transition away from, if we expand it, emissions will fall. This is why I didn't put up any slides. It's just absolute nonsense. But if Australia wants to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, stick with me, this will be really complicated. What we need to do is stop building new coal and gas projects. Leaving aside the fact that it doesn't matter where in the world the gas and coal is burned, it causes our climate to change. Leave that aside. Just the fugitive emissions, the methane that comes out when you build a new coal mine and you build a new gas project, those emissions count here in Australia and they're big and they're easy to avoid. You just don't build new ones. Complicated stuff. How to tackle climate change? Don't build new coal mines. Don't build new gas projects. That's most of it. Stop subsidising fossil fuel use. Stop subsidising, literally subsidising the opening of the new coal and new gas that I said we don't need. It's complicated stuff. You following so far? Yeah. Stop native forest logging. Right? All of this, we need to sequester carbon in the landscape. Yeah, stop sucking it out of the landscape by clearing native forests. Australia's still doing massive land clearing. We're still clearing native forests in Tasmania. We're destroying habitat while people are going, oh, we need a nature repair market. It's like, what about subsidised nature destruction? We're literally subsidising native forest logging and subsidising new coal and gas projects and saying, we need some sort of complicated market mechanism to protect nature. It's like, no, we need to stop killing nature. So, unfortunately, the people that don't want to stop building new coal and don't want to stop building new gas and don't want to stop native forest logging and don't want the subsidies to stop have been really good at convincing people that there must be a more complicated way to tackle climate change. Because we couldn't just do the simple things. Do you remember how we stopped whaling? By stopping whaling. You know how we stopped asbestos mining? By stopping asbestos mining. Right, this is not beyond our wit. But the people that don't want to stop these things and who don't want to stop getting the subsidies have spent billions of dollars on a disinformation campaign to make the simple seem hard. And simple doesn't mean costless. Simple doesn't mean no one will be sad. But the whalers were sad. And the asbestos miners were sad. And the tobacco industry was sad. Okay? It's okay to make people sad. It's democracy. If we think that we're better off without it, we should be without it. But we've been convinced that it's harder than that. And I'm not saying it's simple. I'm not saying that none of us will have to endure any change. But your sockets aren't changing. And the vast majority of Australians have to keep doing exactly what they're doing, except when every other technology changes and they lose their jobs too. It's bizarre that we're trying to tackle climate change without disrupting the fossil fuel industry, when the dog grooming industry has already created more jobs than the gas industry. Thank you very much.
I'd like now to welcome up Heidi Lee to join Richard on the stage. Heidi is the CEO of Beyond Zero Emissions, an award-winning independent think tank specialising in energy and clean tech solutions. Heidi brings 2 decades of cross-sector sustainability expertise from the building industry to her role. At BZE, she heads up a diverse team of engineers, scientists, policy experts and communications professionals. Together they develop ambitious and practical climate solutions for government and industry that benefit communities across Australia. Heidi holds a Master's of Science in Architecture from Deakin University. So please welcome Heidi.
It is an absolute pleasure to be here tonight. A packed out room. I mean, you know, you've got the cream of the crop, the most committed people in Baldwin when you are braving weather like this to come and join us. So thank you for joining us tonight. And I absolutely loved the warm welcome from so many people who have actually been a part of Beyond Zero Emissions over the years. And can you just do a show of hands? I know only I can see, you can see this too, but if you've contributed to Beyond Zero Emissions, we've got people all across the room. There we go. Thank you so much for the work that you have done to be able to create some of the action that is needed to take some of those macroeconomic ideas, those big ideas about public policy, about the way that society should be, and about the way that we should put our values into action. Whenever I hear some of the big solutions, the questions that I see coming through are in two parts. One is that endless curiosity that those of us have who don't have your experience. We're like, well, what does this mean for the energy security, and what does that do to the national economy with the shift to renewables? And we've got questions about the technicality of like an under-resourced public service sector. But most of the questions here are about what can I do? How can I have better conversations about this myself? How can I be a part of bringing some of these big ideas and these solutions, these simple, not expensive questions of choice? How can people in this room play a part in that? And that's the kind of stuff we do at Beyond Zero Emissions. We've done a lot of research for a long time, and I think the show of hands here, a lot of people have been a part of a lot of that. We do citizen science style research for those there's a few people here who haven't been involved. We do citizen science style research, so we're an outlet for some of those really smart people, smart ideas to come together and do that. We did it for about 10 years before we invested in some marketing. And then we realised that actually it was the way that we were talking about it that was really preventing people from coming along and hearing us and being persuaded by what we were doing. And we do have our head of communications here, Dougal, in the front row, with his mum, Judith. But Dougal's down here if you want to talk in the break about the communications angle on this. You've had a chance to pause. So one of the big ideas that you're kind of putting forward is you're just a master of equivalencies. I care about those oodles and that entire industry that's built up around them. But I also care about a whole lot of the communities, because I grew up in regional Australia in a coal community, and the opportunities that we had, my cohort graduating high school, even undergrad, the grad sort of that, those of us who went from grade 10 to grade 11, there were a chunk of us who were smart kids. We were going to go to uni, probably college, and we were probably going to be teachers or engineers. But anyone who didn't have the grades for that, we all wanted a traineeship out in the mines, out in Moranbah, out in Emerald. There's just such enormous opportunity out there. And 25, 30 years later, that workforce training, that workforce shift, because, it does matter that there are tens of thousands of people that are going to be going through some big life shifts, and it matters because they're actually concentrated that's entire towns. So that idea that it's a little bit of change at a macro level, absolutely. But when it comes down to those micro issues, they're concentrated. So I thought you could talk a little bit to that idea about communities in transition at a smaller level than that whole economy picture.
So I did work experience in a coal mine. I wanted to be a coal miner, and I'm still wreaking my revenge on them for not giving me a job. I grew up in the Hunter Valley. I could see 3 coal-fired power stations from where I grew up. Most of my friends went on to work in the mines, and I wanted to too. But in those days, it was literally a closed shop. On the application form, you had to list nearest relative working in a coal mine. And my parents had moved to the Hunter Valley and didn't work in a coal mine, so I missed out. So I've never forgiven nor forgotten. But just to be clear, the mining industry is automating as fast as it can. Let's just be clear, the jobs are going. The question is whether the climate is going to get changed or not. Anyone that wants to keep things the way they are, that's nice. Didn't work for the car industry, didn't work for the textile industry, didn't work for the photo development labs. But if coal and gas workers are the first workers in the history of Australia that we're willing to say, you're guaranteed a job for life, and we promise we won't change technology or change things until we've sorted you out, that might be a nice way to treat workers, but this, just to be clear, that would be the first group of workers that we've ever treated like that. If we wanted to protect workers in the coal industry, then we should ban robot trucks right now. No, I'm not joking, right? This is a piss take. The coal industry aren't trying to protect jobs in the coal industry. The coal industry are trying to protect the coal industry. The workers are just the human shield. And they are working, like the most coal, I don't know if you know anything about coal mining. Coal mining is not what you think it is. If you're picturing blokes with helmets going down holes and things, no. No, a coal mine is a hole the size of multiple suburbs. And it's just trucks driving around the up. The main job in a coal mine is truck driver. Okay, that's the job. And they're working on robot trucks. And all those people are going to lose their jobs. So if, and I don't believe it for a minute, but if we want to protect the communities, we should ban robot trucks. And the coal industry will fight that tooth and nail because they're planning on sacking the same workers that we're worried about trying to help. The minute they can get a robot truck to replace all those workers, they're gone. So that's step one. It's nonsense. They're lying. Step two, we're still opening brand new coal mines in parts of Australia that have never mined a tonne of coal in history. The Adani coal mine up in far north Queensland, they've never mined coal up there. So while we're getting told, oh, how are we going to help protect and transition people out of coal communities, we're opening new coal communities. We're employing new people in new mines, which we're then going to have to figure out how to transition them out of in 10 or 20 years' time. The same with all these new gas projects. So I hear you. I'm not unsympathetic to workers losing their jobs. I've actually spent 30 years on the other side of that debate. I've spent 30 years saying, could we be nice to the unemployed car workers? No. Could we be nice to the unemployed textile workers? No. Now apparently I'm the bad guy for saying, well, you know what, people are going to lose their jobs in coal communities. Let's figure that out. But it's ridiculous. It is deceptive and misleading to say we have to be gentle and figure out how to help Barry the coal miner transition out when we are opening new projects right here. Like we're saying to young people today, move to a new part of Australia and work in a new gas project. Right, so we have to pick a lane. If, and I don't believe it for a minute, but if we were transitioning away from fossil fuels, crazy, we wouldn't be opening new fossil fuels. But on the one hand, I'm being told we have to figure out how to transition these workers and we can't tackle climate change until we have, while we're still opening new projects. This is fraud. This is intellectual dishonesty.
One of the things that I think is most inspiring about being in the Hunter is probably not that pervasive lie about where jobs are coming from and where they're going, but it's actually the other side of that robot truck, because they're actually making the robots for those all-electric mining vehicles in the Hunter as well. They're establishing enormous advancements in those like advanced manufacturing centres, and it's not like you're going to have people walk off a coal mine and just into a job in a manufacturing thing. But there is the innovation side of it, and what we've got in Australia is some of the most sophisticated technologies being invented here to be able to address that industry, and those skills have direct application to some of these really wicked problems that we've got about, optimising a renewable energy grid and all of these other sort of technical challenges that we already have the skills to be able to solve. And it's really inspiring when you see companies like that are, basically built off mining demand for the services at the moment. A lot of it's being propped up by mining. But it's that because we had those industries supporting that sector, that we weren't just buying that off the shelf, because we had local manufacturing capability. When we had no ventilators made in Australia at the start of COVID. We had a company in the Hunter that made one within 3 months. They made a ventilator, something they'd never done before. They'd never been in medtech, and they did that because they had the skills in-house to be able to solve really tricky challenges, not just to solve them intellectually, but actually to build them as well. And there's a role for that as well as, someone's got to make the robots.
Yeah, but I agree. But just to be clear, there's 800,000 people work in manufacturing in Australia. 800,000. There's 20,000 work in gas. All right, the manufacturing industry is far bigger than the gas industry. It's far bigger than the coal industry. And the fact, great that someone's, building the robot trucks up in Newcastle, but to be clear, there'll be far, far more things made in manufacturing unrelated to the mining industry. But the mining industry is just so good at taking out full-page ads saying, look what I did. Right? That's their trick. That's their superpower. Because if you give them free gas and they don't pay any tax, they've got a lot of money to spend on ads. No, I'm not kidding, right? So that's why every time they employ someone, they tell you about it. Every time they invest in some research and development, they tell you about it. Right? It's just they don't mention the free gas and that all the profits went offshore. So, yeah, of course. But, just to be clear, unskilled truck drivers in coal mines are not going to be making robots.
No.
They're going to lose their jobs, and they're far more likely to get a job and played a role in this. The biggest thing that's going to create jobs in the Hunter Valley is the Port of Newcastle, the world's largest coal port, has finally, after 7 years, it's finally allowed to build a large container terminal there. There are going to be far more jobs created transitioning the Hunter coal port into a container terminal that takes trucks off the road in Sydney. And guess what? The people driving trucks in the mine are going to be driving trucks and other equipment around the port. So, yeah, absolutely, we need to think about affected communities, like we should have thought about the people in Elizabeth when the car industry shut down, and we didn't. And by the way, I grew up in Newcastle, right? BHP used to employ 20,000 people up there. 20,000. Did I tell you how many people work in the entire gas industry across Australia? 20,000, right? It's not a big transition. Right? We've done this before. So, Australia does have lots of sophisticated advanced manufacturing, and most of it's unrelated to mining.
So take us a little bit down that journey, because when you hang out in the Hunter, one of the things that happened during the BHP exit was around the way that the company that had made enormous profits at that point in time and then made the choice to exit played the largest role in what came next. There was no sit back and wait for the government to do something. And I meet people now who are glass artists and all sorts of things who say they count their blessings for the day that that industry closed because of how it closed. So take us through some of that.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry about the batteries, but
Oh, it's the battery. Oh, yeah. We need some base load. We need some base load around here. I reckon about 8 nuclear reactors would. Just so you know, if we built all of those reactors, if we built all of them on schedule, my back of the envelope numbers is it'd be about 10% of Australia's electricity. It's not even big. I grew up in the Hunter. I got asthma living across the road from BHP when I was doing my undergrad degree. True story. People used to hang their sheets out in Newcastle and bring them in dirty. And by the way, the enormous volume of coal trains still going through Newcastle, really the air quality in suburbs, the parts of Newcastle that are near the coal lines on the way to the port, the air quality is still terrible. And the impact on child health is really significant. But don't worry about that, backbone of economy and stuff. But yeah, when BHP closed down, it used to employ around 20,000 people. They didn't all get sacked on the one day. It was gradual over a period of time. But yeah, look, BHP played a big role in that for a number of reasons. Yes, they made a lot of money out of the town, but more importantly, they were still making a lot of money out of the coal mines up the Hunter. And they're still one of the world's largest mining companies that wanted the Australian government to keep subsidising them. So it wasn't kind of out of the goodness of their heart. It was out of the desperation to keep making enormous profits in other parts of Australia. That said, the state and federal governments did play a big role in that as well. But yeah, again, we do know how to manage these transitions. We've done them before. And again, if 20,000 people worked at BHP in Newcastle and 20,000 people work in the entire gas industry, I promise you transitioning away from gas will be a hell of a lot easier than shutting down something as big as steel making in Newcastle. But it's not just Australia, other countries have gone through this. Again, it's in the interests of people that don't want change to keep exaggerating the complexity and the cost of the change. And I absolutely understand the desire of individuals for certainty and for communities for certainty. But all I can say is that we've never offered that certainty to any other industry. If we keep pumping out fossil fuels, there's no certainty for any of us. So I know it's nice to think about plans. I know it's nice to think about forecasts, but planning in macroeconomics is worse than predicting the weather. We have to be emotionally and intellectually resilient enough to think, I don't know what the future's going to look like, but I want a future that's got more of this in it and less of this in it. Because if we try to plan this, we'll never do it. And by the way, we'd have never rolled these out if we waited for the plan. Okay, we just cracked on and did it. And that was far more disruptive to the Australian economy. It wasn't just photo development labs, right? Remember street directories? Remember them? Remember all the receptionists I was talking about before? Like, this thing's transformed every industry. And we did it without a single government inquiry.
So you talked about the government, you talked about interests, and number 1, 8 votes up on our thing here is very much about what's an effective way that you can see to kind of clear out some of this status quo to be able to free up some of the type of thinking that you're talking about and start to level the playing field between what we've had and who's gained from that, and what could come next and who could gain from that.
As an economist, as someone that's interested in public policy, and as someone as a citizen, and as someone who has to run their own life, I just think it's good to keep things simple. And what I want from public policy, what I want from our elected representatives, is for them to put more money into the things I want more of and less money into the things I want less of. Well, here we are in Australia still subsidising fossil fuel expansion. So let's just make it simple for you. If we're still subsidising fossil fuel expansion, we're still causing the problem. So I'm not terribly concerned about optimising the path to the perfect solution when we're still literally subsidising the destruction. You know, if you were drinking poison, the fact that someone's working on the antidote is not a reason to keep drinking the poison. If Australia was serious about tackling climate change, you'd stop building new coal, you'd stop building new gas. No one's saying shut it all down tomorrow. Like, that's a straw man. We're still expanding into coal. We're still expanding into gas. We're still subsidising that expansion while talking about, I wonder how we'll stop doing that one day. I don't know, maybe stop doing that today. In order for us as individuals to feel any empowerment in our democratic conversations, it has to be simple, right? If we all have to agree on an 80-page plan, I'm not saying someone shouldn't write one, right? But democracy is not technocracy, right? I don't know how my car works. I don't know about you probably do, right? I don't know how mine works, but I know how to drive it, and I know how to get from where I am to where I want to go. I don't have to know how my car works to evaluate, does my car get me where I want to go? We don't actually have to. We, as citizens in a democracy, don't have to have the plan. We have to be able to say with clarity what we want from our elected representatives, what we expect. I want more of this, and if I want less fossil fuels and someone's subsidising more fossil fuels, then I just need to know they're not the representative for me, right? unfortunately, all of the complexity that the industry has created is used to dress up inaction as action. It's not complicated. If we're still expanding, if we're still drinking the poison, it doesn't matter how cheap the antidote is. If we're still expanding fossil fuel production, if we're still subsidising it, well, frankly, I don't care about your net zero plan.
So specifically, do you have any comments on the Clean Up Politics Act that Dr. Monique Ryan's put forward?
Oh, look, I think we should think really hard about cleaning up politics. I think transparency is really important. I think that they might seem unrelated, but look, the Australia Institute pushed for 10 years for the creation of a Federal Corruption Commission, and when we started pushing, people said we didn't need one. You don't hear that anymore. And I used to say, great, then we should have one. Like the best reason, if we don't need one, great, we can give ourselves a clean bill of health. You know, that would be cheap insurance. So it seems unrelated, but, you know, how come the gas industry isn't paying any tax? I'd like to know. How come we're still, so distorting our policy? I think having a federal corruption watchdog is a really important part of having good climate policy. I think that we have to be very careful, and I've spoken to Monique about this, I'm not disagreeing with her here. We have to be very careful with, and it's happening at the moment, let's just sort of get rid of donations, you know, that'll fix it. Be very careful here. Be very careful here. The major political parties love the idea of public funding for them and no donations for independents. So if you ask me, do I support donation reform, I won't answer your question because the word donation and the word reform need careful definition. Did you know that, for example, union affiliation fees for the ALP aren't a donation because they're an affiliation fee, right? So everything about writing laws is harder than what I'm trying to say, keep it simple. But yeah, no, Monique Ryan's private members bill's got lots of good stuff in there. But watch this space. The major parties are about to start saying, I think we need more public funding and less donations for elections. And that might seem attractive, but I promise you the devil's in the detail.
Talk us through some of the detail behind Japan. They buy a whole lot of our gas. They sell a lot of it on. Tell us about what's an effective solution here. How do we use the truth to be able to create change?
Look, Japan plays a very interesting role in Australian economics, Australian politics, Australian foreign policy. Japan is a major investor in the gas export facilities that we have. Okay, it spent lots of money on gas export facilities. And to export gas is really hard. Like the Russians export gas through pipelines, that's pretty easy. We have to liquefy it and put it on those big boats with the bubbles, and it's really expensive to do that, and it takes a lot of energy to do that. And Japan are major investors in these, and they're basically the world's biggest refrigerators, right? They chill gas down and stick it on the boats. Now, the Japanese have spent billions of dollars building these big gas export facilities, and then we give them free gas. And then they refrigerate it and they export the gas to Japan and to elsewhere, and they sell it at lots of profit. Yay them. And at the moment, like we're you got the Australian government saying, we have to explore for more gas, we have to produce more gas, we have to export more gas because we've got these contracts with Japan. Well, Japan is actually on-selling the gas that we're supplying to them. So it's not like Japan needs the gas or Japan's lights will go out. It's Japan's making a fortune selling the gas we gave them for free. So unfortunately, for reasons I don't understand, the Australian government's future gas strategy is full of the rhetoric that we need more gas to meet our export contracts and to make sure that Australia is a reliable trade partner. All this language, but let me just clear this up for you. Australia doesn't export the gas. It's private companies that export the gas. It's Japanese private companies that export the gas. And if a private company has signed a contract to supply a product that it doesn't have, that reflects badly on the company that signed the contract, not the country that they operate in. So the gas industry, again, it's bluffing us all. It's like Australia's reputation will be harmed. I don't know quite what that means, but, you know, how it will be harmed and other countries won't think we're reliable trading partners if we don't actually keep producing or allowing the production of new gas. Why? Oh, because I committed to supply gas for the next 30 years. Have you got 30 years worth of gas supply? No. Well, why'd you sign a gas contract then? So just to be clear, it's not Australia that signed these contracts. It's all foreign owned. It's private companies. If I was a catering business and I promised to provide catering tonight, and then 10 minutes before I rang up and said, you know, I don't employ any staff and don't have any food, like, I've breached the contract. If the gas industry's promised to sell more gas than it's got the legal right for, that's their problem, not ours.
So some of the things that we learnt at Beyond Zero Emissions when we were like, you know, got all these great ideas, we've got some of the smartest people around coming up with these great ideas, and we're taking, you know, this idea of emissions. We've always structured our reports around what if you just deployed commercially available technology? Stuff that you don't have to go out and invent, even though I do like the robot trucks. You don't need to invent anything. You could just do more, make more of what we've already got and put it everywhere. Just put out solar and put out wind, where we've currently got coal and gas. And, you know, transmission lines are transmission lines, no matter what colour electrons are going through them. We've got things to do with batteries, you've got little technologies, but it all exists. Like, you don't have to invent anything. We've worked a lot in industry, like looking at how you can make green steel, green aluminium, all the other green stuff, the green commodities to export. And, you know, with really high level figures, because we all like to pretend that we're economists, you see, Richard, we all like to pretend.
It's not much of an aspiration.
It's so fun because, like you said, you just say whatever. No, you run numbers on these things, and, you know, we've got forecasts. We did gas out to 2050, or you shut off all the coal and gas, you build out a lot of renewable energy in that same time frame, and you could sell clean commodities to people. Like, clean commodities is a shorthand for things that you make with renewable energy, and then you put them on a boat, or you export them, or you run cables under the seabed. You could replace all of that revenue 3 times over by 2050. So instead of looking at a declining industry and protecting those declining, you know, the demand for the, like, no one wants it. That's the big catch here. We're all talking about you need to get more out of it, but nobody wants to buy it. And when it came to that thing, and we were like, well, what could you replace it? Is there some kind of technical challenge here? There's no technical challenge. You could do it tomorrow. Well, you could start doing it tomorrow. It'd replace itself within, you know, 15 years. And if you really put your shoulder to it, you'd be 3 times as much as we have today by 2050. So there's enormous opportunities on the upside. But again, one of the things that we learned, because we're like, how can you come up with so many solutions and still not be persuading everybody, because we've got the truth. And we found out, Dougal, I'm speaking to your area of the business now, but like, we found out no one cares about the truth. Truth doesn't persuade people. Truth is complicated sometimes. There's nuance and there's a bit of ambiguity, and we don't know exactly what it's going to look like. So we found that we had to get out of the macro. We had to get out of talking about 100% renewables, renewable superpower. And if we were going to talk about any of that, it had to be to federal politicians. It had to be like big ideas people, economists like it. But when it came to talking about energy transition, you had to talk to real jobs in real communities in real places. You had to talk about what specifically is going to be different here. Am I going to see like a transmission line from my house? Am I going to see a wind turbine when I look out, when I go for a walk on the beach in the morning in the Illawarra? Like, that tangibility of these big ideas. And you've been in this game a long time. Like, how do you find that, you know, the big ideas are really attractive to a cohort of people, but when it comes to change, and a lot of Australians are facing a lot of change, no matter where we live. What's your recommendation about how we help people care, and how we help people care enough to take action?
Most people don't care about most things, and that's fine. Like, really all of the transitions I've described tonight were not because of some community conversation. Joe Hockey went on the front page of the Fin Review and said, that's it for the car subsidies, and the car industry was gone. There was no community conversation. Right? We signed up to a free trade agreement and we shut down the textile industry. There was no conversation. Someone invented these things and we rolled them out. There was no conversation. So, I hate to say it, but it's kind of an educated, progressive delusion that if only we can get everyone to talk and agree, that we'll drive change. This is not how things work. This is not how the coal mines got approved. Right? I grew up around coal mines. They're not nice looking. I could see coal-fired power stations all night long. I could hear them all night long. There was no community conversation about it. I mean, the hilarious thing with this wind zone off the Illawarra, and everyone's like, oh, if you got a telescope and stood on a hill, you might be able to see a thing. Has anyone ever seen the steel mill at Port Kembla? It's not 20 kilometres out to sea. Right? Like, I don't quite understand why it is that people who want change, a particular kind of change in our energy system, want to achieve that change through a system that's never been used to drive any other change ever. Right? It's not how policy is made. Right? The farmers don't like fracking, and we fracked. The farmers don't like coal mining, and we coal mined. The farmers, or a farmer doesn't want to see a transmission. Oh, hang on then. Oh, everybody, tools down. Tools down. Barry doesn't want to see a wire. How's he feel about coal mines? Hates them. Do we build them? Yep. What about the fracking? Yep. Like, I'm sorry, this is fantasy stuff.
But we're also talking about vested interests, and we're also talking about things being welded onto the way they are. So let's sort of revisit that idea that we want things to change, and feeling as though there's barriers to community involvement, community participation. So if the wanting to change doesn't make any difference, why are we here tonight?
No, I'm saying the vested interests are what's stopping the change.
So how do we influence that?
Well, that's what I've been talking about. Like, stop subsidising the people you hate. Don't vote for people that subsidise the people you hate. Make them pay tax. All right? See, it's not complicated. And when you get them to run a big PR campaign about why they should get subsidies, you're winning. When you get them to run a big PR campaign about why they shouldn't pay for the gas, you're winning. And it's a lot harder for them to pretend to be the backbone of the country while they're defending and demanding subsidies. So, yeah, you put your finger on it. It's the vested interests that are stopping the change. They're using communities as hostages. They're using our feelings for our fellow man against us. And when our fellow man or woman or citizen says, please don't build the fracks, they're like, get stuffed, we'll do what we want. This is manipulative. This is hypocritical. So, yeah, look, what can we do? Well, we need to call out who's stopping it. And I think we have to be very careful about not playing into their trap of how they're stopping it. I'm not kidding. Port Kembla, the steel mill is about the ugliest thing you could build. It looks like something from a sort of, Armageddon movie. And no one in Port Kembla gives it a second thought. It was there before they got there. But a wind turbine over the horizon with binoculars, how will we? I don't know. I don't think I can go to the beach anymore. It's like you're laughing, but smart people are beating us, right? Like, smart people are they're turning our better angels against us, while they're just getting away with, I mean, seriously, Google coal mine aerial view, right? They're hideous, and we're still building them. We're about to build a gas processing hub in the Burrup Peninsula on top of 40,000-year-old rock art, like the oldest outdoor art gallery in the world. And we're going to build a gas processing hub on top of it. And I'm told, oh, yeah, well, we shouldn't, build a transmission line if someone's a bit sad. What about Indigenous people where we're going to build a oh, I can't stop progress.
Well, that's just the oldest continuing culture on Earth.
Right. Who cares about that? Barry doesn't want to see a transmission line.
So I think what we're taking out of this one, I think, is that political action matters. And one of the biggest things that you will find when you start digging into the weeds of all this is that the strongest thing that you can do is organise and vote, and then hold your elected officials to account for the decisions that they do and don't make. And wouldn't it be nice to know who they're meeting with at all times? So much of the change that's ahead of us, we want to have a say in, right? So we've got changing weather events, we've got more extreme weather events happening. We understand that is happening because of the amount of pollution that we're putting into the atmosphere, the rate that we're putting it up there. We're not drawing it down, we're not showing any signs of slowing. We understand that that is going to put additional pressure and vulnerability on the physical infrastructure that we've already built. We've got some of the largest physical infrastructure in the world. I think they like to call it the largest machine in the world down the East Coast, the national, all the poles and wires connected into the national electricity market, and all of the green electrons and the brown ones and the black ones that are going into it. We've got bushfires, we've got floods, we've got storms, we've got tornadoes. We've got vulnerable communities. We've got people with the resources to be able to do this. We've got proposals. We've got green hydrogen projects going in places without enough water to sustain the population, and hydrogen electrolyzers that would take something like 3.5 times as much water, potable water, as that entire community currently has. So when we look at these many unfolding crises, I meant to talk about nature, but Jesus, we've got nature going in there as well. Biodiversity declining, deforestation increasing. When we look at all of this change happening all at once, it's really hard for us to be able to, everyday folks, be able to understand what is causing the particular problem that we're experiencing that we want to alleviate. So we want a whole lot of the bad stuff to stop. We want the cost of living crisis to stop because a lot of people aren't in the upper echelons of income earning. But at the same time, we're seeing, people's properties taken out and they're not being able to be rebuilt in the places where they are. So in this period where we do, it's really serious stuff. We have a period coming up where we have growing uncertainty, growing risk, growing consequences of some of these issues. We need to move quickly. What are your ideas for how we collectively, this group here in the room, how do we support faster change that makes a difference? Not politicians, us.
Well, I think most of these problems are caused by deeply flawed government policy. There's nothing you can do personally to stop new gas projects getting built. And if they get built and new coal mines get built, we're going to break 1.5 degrees. So, yeah, there's all sorts of things that you might want to do in your individual household, and I'm sure you're aware of them. But if we don't act collectively and stop the bad people doing bad things, then bad things are going to happen, right? It's like Americans trying to buy a gun to make themselves safe, right? It doesn't work, right? You actually need to be safe together, not just safe individually. So, yeah, there are lots of problems, but again, I go back to where I started. We're one of the richest countries in the world. There's no problem we can't afford to solve. We can apparently chuck $300 billion at a couple of submarines, which, by the way, aren't going to cause world peace. No, but we're going to spend $300 billion, and it's not and then we fixed it. Right, we'll spend $300 billion on some nuclear subs. Oh, stand down, everybody. That's that. No, that's not the defence budget. That's the subs budget. Right, the defence budget's 10 times bigger than that. And by the way, that's not going to make us safe. So most humans insure their house against catastrophic risk. And at the end of the year, they don't go, house didn't burn down. Idiot. Not wasting my money on that insurance stuff again. What most people do as individuals is try to mitigate large risks. Right? Most people insure their house, they probably insure their car. All right, they probably have health insurance, or they're happy they live in a country that has a general health. The reason, like, we spend a lot of money on defence, right? And we're kind of happy at the end. Oh, I didn't have a war. Phew. Right? But we've spent, like you say, we need to move fast. We've spent 30 years moving slow on all this stuff because apparently we've been worried about overreacting. By the way, there's never been any risk of us overreacting. Imagine if we invested in renewables and didn't need it. Right? Imagine if we invested in energy efficiency and didn't need it. Right? We don't mind all the money we spent on tanks we never used. Look, what do we need to do? We need to start doing the things we should have started doing a long time ago. We need to stop approving new fossil fuel projects. And that's, you can't do that personally, but the people you vote for can. Right? We need to stop doing that. We need to stop subsidising that. We need to stop native forest logging. We need to stop mass land clearing in Queensland. Right? Whereas at the moment we're subsidising all that, and by the way, we're letting the people that are doing the clearing and building, they just go buy a carbon offset and everything's fine. Now, the science is really clear. We need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and we need to sequester. And the "and" does all the work. We need to stop producing CO2 and we need to sequester CO2 in the landscape. We've created this bizarre Australian invention where I'm allowed to pollute more if I don't chop a tree down. Right? But again, the science is crystal clear what we need to do. We need to stop polluting and we need to stop chopping trees down and we need to plant more trees. It's not okay to build a new coal mine if I plant a tree. That's not science. So I hate to say it, we do need, there are things you can do in your household. I'll let other people be expert on that. But if we don't club together and stop the bad actors doing bad things, well, bad things are going to happen. And you know what? Maybe democracy's not smart enough to cope with that. Oh, well, I'll be dead for the worst of it, but my kids won't be. So, I'm determined to keep trying to stop. I don't care about any, if we breach 1.5, well, I'll fight just as hard for 2. Not because I don't care about 1.5, because 2 is better than 2.5. But every day we approve a new coal project is a profitable day for them. Seriously, if you won't change your vote, they won't change their behaviour.